Honing in on making homes more affordable. Ahead on Face the State, rents and mortgages keep going up and the supply of affordable places to live isn't keeping up. So state leaders are looking to reimagine housing in the Buckeye State, what they found out over the last 8 months and what they're proposing to meet the challenge. Also, protesting for Palestine. It's happening on college campuses across the country and at Ohio State. Police here arrested more than 36 protesters during recent demonstrations. Hear what Governor Dwine says about how the arrests were handled. Plus, pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into Ohio's Appalachian region. The goal, to revitalize downtowns and invigorate tourist destinations. Leaders say it could be a game changer. Good morning and thanks for joining us for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. State leaders say Ohio's housing challenges are pervasive and getting worse. They say action needs to be taken now. After 8 months of work, the State Senate Select Committee on Housing recently released this 93-page report titled Housing Reimagined. It outlines 23 recommendations for the short-term and long haul to fix the supply and cost of housing in our state. Some of the key recommendations are create a housing dashboard to increase transparency about home prices, rental rates, inventory of houses, and foreclosures. Encourage alternative housing, such as modular homes and tiny homes. Review consumer protections in the home buying process. Update codes for renters, and look at property taxes and incentives for builders. The committee says demand for housing is higher than the supply of homes everywhere in Ohio, keeping mortgages and rental rates high. They also say having competition in the market among builders would help bring costs down. Committee Chair Senator Michelle Reynolds says the first thing the state needs to do is take action.
We can no longer be casual about this issue. It is a priority and we need to make it a priority because we're facing challenges that are increasingly getting worse.
To be categorically clear, we must recognize there is still work to be done. Together we can build a future where every Ohioan has a place to call home.
And Senator Reynolds says the first thing the state should not do is disrupt the free market with burdensome housing regulations. Senators introduced several bills, but the committee acknowledges it will take a long time to fix the housing challenges. They're looking at it as having goals for 6 months, 2 years, up to 10 years, but they say this is a start. Joining me now to talk about the housing crisis in Ohio are Republican State Senator Michelle Reynolds of Canal-Winchester. She is the chair of the Senate Select Committee on Housing. And Democratic Senator Herschel Craig of Columbus. He's a member of the committee as well. Thank you both for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having us.
And this question's for both of you, just to get the ball rolling here. What is your biggest takeaway from the months of work that you did, all the traveling, the testimony you heard from, I think, 200 and some witnesses, and the information you gathered, Senator Reynolds? What was the biggest thing that you learned from that work?
So I think it confirmed what we already know, is that this is quite a challenge. It's pervasive and it's escalating, and that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to get this challenge addressed. We need to work together collaboratively, and the state needs to play a role, but we really wanted to know what role that should be, that the state should to intervene in this situation. And so I think the biggest takeaway is that we need a regional approach to this problem. We cannot continue to work in silos, and we need to support our local communities as we move forward to address this challenge.
How about for you, Senator Craig? What was the biggest
Well,
thing?
absolutely. The acknowledgement that there is a housing crisis that is both fundamental and foundational, that all of our families have safe, decent, and affordable housing. And it's clear as we travel around the state, certainly it's bipartisan committee. I've served as the ranking member on the committee. But getting input from our public sector, important sector, getting information from our advocates and so many folks, our residents from all over the state. So it was vitally important.
So what is the big issue here, Senator Reynolds? What is causing this crisis, if there's probably not just one thing?
I believe it's a combination of several factors. We have economic factors, we have social factors, we have policy factors. And so it's a perfect storm. We are in the tale of two cities. In Ohio, we have our urban region is experiencing economic growth that's very unprecedented. And then we also have in our rural areas where we have population decline. And so it's a problem either way. But there's a number of things that have contributed to this. And inflation, of course, is one of the paramount reasons that we're experiencing this problem. But, you know, here in Ohio, we are attracting new companies, new business. It's an economic driver. And so it's exacerbated the problem. And at this point, we no longer can ignore it.
Yeah, kind of a positive that's creating a different kind of negative. And Senator Craig, did you find that this is kind of a supply and demand issue? That there
Well,
just aren't enough homes
absolutely.
out
In
there?
the state of Ohio, there are 270, a deficit of 270 housing units. In central Ohio, with all of our growth, enormous growth, and things that we're excited about, there's 52,000, a deficit of 52,000 houses. That's deeply troubling. If we did nothing today, we could fill those. But the fact of the matter is, looking at 1 million people coming to central Ohio, we need to be having 88,000 houses, homes for our families. So there
Is that like
very
built
much.
every year, or are you talking in the long term?
You know, I think, as you know, there hasn't been a zoning revisit in 70 years. And so they're engaged right now in a very comprehensive process to make sure. And while our work is that we're working alongside them, not to kind of in the city of Columbus, in the work that they're doing.
So what can be done about it? I guess that's the million-dollar question right now. And the committee came up with these 23 recommendations to start tackling the problem. We have a graphic we can show with some of the key ones on there. It's only 6 of the 23. Yes. But Senator Reynolds, where do you think the key is with these recommendations the committee came up with after these 8 months?
So I think there's a number of factors that we can do, some that take legislative action and others that are just kind of good policy decisions that can be made. One of the things is that we need to position Ohio to be a pro-housing state. We need to embrace the fact that we are growing, but we need smart, responsible growth. And we realize that when you start talking about pro-housing, that scares people, right? It can scare people in local communities to say, hey, we don't want that here. We have a NIMBY syndrome, which is not in my backyard. And so one of the things that the state can do is to message that we here are embracing people in Ohio. We're embracing housing in Ohio. We realize that it's a challenge. And so we need to have a Yes in My Backyard campaign.
The YIMBY instead of NIMBY, right?
Yes, absolutely. So to help our local communities be able to address that problem, that no, we're not going to just put anything in our backyards. We want to be careful. We want to be strategic. And we want to make sure that we're deliberate about what we are building. But in order to tackle this problem, we have to have density. That is more supply of housing. We have to use what we have and make good space and good use of what we have. The other thing that we can do is to invest our resources wisely. We already do a number of different things through the LIHTC program, low-income housing tax credits. We have the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. We have the Welcome Home Ohio program. We're doing some wonderful things, but we have to make sure that it counts, because this is when it matters. And so we have to look at those investments and make very strategic investments. And we also need to work alongside our private sector. We know that this is a problem also for the business community, who very much so want to know, what can we do about workforce housing? So we need to couple that and say, okay, to make the dollar stretch, how can we leverage public-private partnerships and make sure that we have the housing that we need, not just from an affordability standpoint for low income, but all the way up. Housing needs to be affordable at every level.
Yeah, and you know, one of the interesting things too, Senator, was when we think of housing, maybe we think more in the traditional sense of a single-family home, or maybe a fourplex or an apartment building. But the committee is also looking at things with alternative forms of housing, like tiny homes and different modular things, right?
Well, absolutely, and as we should be. I think the innovation that is occurring, I think the chairman has rightly stated it. We need to certainly be open to different approaches, different concepts, and ideas regarding this matter. And we heard about that as we traveled around the state. You know, it is a complex issue, but it's one in which it's important that we begin to do the work. And what is also, I am so pleased to see that both chambers are looking at this issue. We have legislation in both chambers. Now the work must begin. Next week, in fact, I have a hearing on we call it the circuit breaker, where we're looking at capping at certain levels, at 65 and at a certain level of income. Certainly the Senator and I, we have legislation that we're introducing, and we will next week, only introduced it, but we will have hearings next week. So now we begin the process of really doing the hard work, the work that needs to happen.
The information is gathered, now it's time to put it
Absolutely.
into motion. Senator Reynolds, I guess when you look at this, there are some things that can be done in the short term, but this is really something that's going to take a while.
Yeah.
So kind of setting those goals that are farther out is part of this as well. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. So there's a long game and a short game. We didn't get here overnight, so we can't anticipate that we're going to be able to just wave a magic wand and all is going to be well. And we also need to know, what does it look like when we are doing the right things, which is one of the reasons why we have a recommendation for an Ohio housing dashboard, because everybody says the sky is falling, but how do we know when it's not falling anymore if we're doing the right things? So we need to be able to have measurable outcomes and track and a dashboard to be able to see, with some of these policy decisions and investments that we're making, what does it look like? Are we in the green? Do we need to do more of it, less of it? Are we doing the wrong thing? So that way we can really move the needle. We are data driven here in Ohio, and we need to make sure that we continue to do that so that we can make good policy decisions.
Just have about 30 seconds left, Senator. What do you hope happens after all this work?
Well, the truth of the matter is, and the Senator has rightly stated, is that we want to make housing not just two of those things, both affordable housing and housing that is affordable for all of our families. They deserve it. I think we're in a position to do the work. Obviously, there's some short-term goals and immediate goals that we need to most certainly ensure that happens, and there's some long-range goals that we need to have happen comprehensively, thoughtfully, and they need to happen.
Senator Herschel Craig, Senator Michelle Reynolds, thank you for your time today, and we'll see how this all plays out over the coming months and years in the legislature.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you, Doug, so much.
Thank you. Well, still ahead on Face the State. Pro-Palestine protesters are making their voices heard on college campuses across the country and here at Ohio State. Hear from students on both sides and what the governor had to say about a recent demonstration. Plus, will President Biden be on the Ohio ballot? His campaign says adamantly yes, but that's still up in the air. The latest on where the situation stands. Welcome back to Face the State. Unrest on college campuses continued throughout the week. Demonstrators have rallied for a ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza and to urge universities to divest from ties with Israel. Police have arrested more than 1,000 people nationwide so far. More than 36 have been arrested during demonstrations at Ohio State University. Here in Columbus, protesters continued their calls for Ohio State University to divest ties with Israel. This is video from a campus demonstration on Wednesday when hundreds of people gathered once again. It lasted about 3 hours and remained peaceful. Protesters say they want the university to not only divest, but also enact an academic boycott of Israeli institutions. 10 TV heard from one student who just returned from New York after joining encampments at schools including Columbia University.
It's beautiful to see my fellow students. While I didn't attend those schools, I made a lot of friends who did attend those schools, and it's beautiful to see them standing up for what they believe in and to see them standing up for the people of Gaza.
We also heard from a Jewish student. He says he no longer feels safe to wear clothing or jewelry representing his faith without fear of retaliation.
The one thing that I truly want to see is a message of peace sent. When they chant that the Israeli Defense Force and the KKK and Columbus Police are all the same, it does not cause peace. It does not resolve the problem. It only perpetrates it and causes more issues.
The university has told us they cannot divest from Israel because of Ohio state law. A university spokesperson says Ohio revised code prohibits the university from divesting any interest in Israel and prohibits adoption or adhering to a policy that requires divestment from Israel or with persons or interests associated with it. No arrests were made during Wednesday's protest, and demonstrators dispersed peacefully. It came after the previous week. On Tuesday, April 23rd, 2 Ohio State students were arrested during a protest. Then on Thursday, the 25th, campus police arrested 3 people in the morning during a protest, including a university employee and a graduate student. But later that night, both campus police and state troopers arrested 36 people during another protest. 16 were OSU students. The other 20 were not affiliated with the university. We spoke with Ohio Governor Mike DeWine about these protests. He says he believes the demonstration that resulted in 36 arrests was handled correctly by the university.
These demonstrations and these arrests were done in open view. Anybody could have had a camera there and did with cell phones. All our troopers now have cameras on them, so it's all very, very transparent. And I think if anybody has a problem with it, they can look at that, any of that, and I think what you're going to see is this was handled very professionally.
As the protests around the country and the conflict overseas unfold, stay up to date on any major developments by getting the 10 TV app. You can read the latest headlines and get push alerts from the Columbus News Leader sent straight to your phone. It's a free download in your phone's app store. A new development this past week in the battle over the controversial transgender health care and women's sports bill. A Franklin County judge granted an extension to the temporary restraining order blocking a ban on gender-affirming care for minors. Judge Michael Holbrook told me the extension runs through May 20th. Judge Holbrook initially blocked House Bill 68 from taking effect a little over 2 weeks ago. The pause was for 14 days. The law was set to take effect on April 24th. He says the hearing on the permanent injunction will take place over 2 days on May 16th and 17th. The plaintiffs and the state will each be able to present arguments. He hopes to have a decision by May 20th. House Bill 68 bans transgender surgeries and hormone therapies for minors and bans transgender girls and women from competing in women's and girls' school sports. Holbrook said in a written opinion on April 16th that it's likely the law violates a requirement that state legislation deal with a single subject. The ACLU and ACLU of Ohio sued on behalf of 2 families. Their lawsuit alleges the law denies transgender minors health care and specifically discriminates against their accessing it. Supporters say the bill protects children from permanent harm. Attorney General Dave Yost also filed an emergency motion with the Ohio Supreme Court. That motion argues that Judge Holbrook overstepped his authority because his order applies to the entire state and not just the 2 plaintiffs the ACLU sued on behalf of. A spokesperson for the Supreme Court says there is no specific time for a response to Yost's motion. Judge Holbrook says he has heard nothing yet from the Supreme Court, so he is proceeding with the case. Now to a big chunk of money flowing to Ohio's Appalachian region. Governor Mike DeWine says he doesn't want the region to be neglected anymore. So the state is pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into the 32 Appalachian counties to invigorate their economies and spur tourism. Wednesday in Chillicothe, Governor DeWine announced $154 million in grants as part of the Downtowns and Destinations Initiative.
We've looked at this part of the state and it's been neglected in the past. But I also think it has tremendous potential, and it's really, we have the opportunity to use that, develop that potential.
The governor's office says the goal is to revitalize historic downtown districts, create new opportunities for recreation, and make the experience better for tourists visiting the region's cultural sites. In this round of funding, the state awarded grants to 30 projects in 12 counties. For example, the city of Chillicothe received $35 million. One part of the project calls for the renovation of the 1926 Armory in Yoctangi Park into the UNESCO World Heritage Sites Visitors Center. Ohio's first UNESCO World Heritage Site, the ceremonial mounds of the Hopewell Culture National Historic Park, is a short 10-minute drive away. 4 Hopewell ceremonial earthwork sites in Ross County will receive upgrades such as pavilions, shelters, and bike trails.
Now with the mounds getting the designation as a World Heritage Site, you're going to really see people come in, not just from all over the United States, but you're going to see people come in from all over the world.
The upgrades at Yoctangi Park also include a new pavilion for a farmer's market, a roundabout entrance to the park, and a large outdoor amphitheater.
There are not words to express how big a deal this is. This is the word game changer was used. The governor was looking for transformational, and he got it. I mean, this will change the trajectory of Chillicothe for years to come.
Chillicothe Mayor Luke Feeney says they hope to have the work mostly finished by late 2026. This round of funding is part of the larger $500 million Appalachian Community Grant Program. The governor's office says $144 million had already been awarded, including $64 million to improve health care access. Again, $154 million was awarded in this round. The state says nearly $200 million in grant funding will be announced in the coming weeks. Governor DeWine says those projects will be all along the Ohio River. The November election is now 6 months away, and as of right now, there is still a question as to whether President Biden will be on the ballot in Ohio. Next, what's led to this uncertainty and where efforts to get him on the ballot stand.
Construction happening this weekend, shutting down parts of I-670 and State Route 315. And Monday on Wake Up CBUS, we'll tell you about another major project set to begin. I'm Clay Gordon. What you need to know before you hit the roads. It's on Monday on Wake Up CBUS, starting at 4:25.
Federal help is coming to those affected by the March 14th tornadoes in 11 Ohio counties. President Biden declared that a major disaster exists in Ohio after the deadly and destructive tornadoes. The Indian Lake area was hit especially hard. The state estimates 250 housing units are still needed for those who lost their homes. The president's declaration makes federal funding available. The help can include grants for temporary housing and home repairs, as well as low-cost loans for uninsured property losses. Now the latest on efforts to get President Joe Biden on the November ballot in Ohio. His campaign is adamant that he will be on the ballot come November, but officially that is still up in the air. The deadline to make sure he's on it is approaching this week. State leaders on both sides and in both chambers still say they are having discussions to make sure President Biden is on the ballot. I reached out to the Biden campaign about the ballot situation. They sent this statement saying, Joe Biden will be on the ballot in all 50 states. State officials have the ability to grant provisional ballot access certification prior to the conclusion of presidential nominating conventions. In 2020 alone, states like Alabama, Illinois, Montana, and Washington all allowed provisional certification for Democratic and Republican nominees. Now, however, both Secretary of State Frank LaRose and Attorney General Dave Yost say Ohio law does not allow for provisional certification of candidates. They have to be officially nominated by their party. The issue is that Ohio's deadline to certify a candidate on the ballot is August 7th, 90 days from the election. But the Democratic National Convention won't officially nominate President Biden until August 19th, almost 2 weeks later. To fix this, the Democratic National Committee can either move up its nominating convention or the state legislature can create an exception and allow President Biden to be on the ballot. The legislative fix is what leaders have been talking about. The way the law stands, that fix would have to happen by May 9th for the president to get on the November 5th ballot in Ohio. That's because Ohio laws become effective 90 days after they are signed into law. Secretary of State Frank LaRose told me he has no choice but to uphold the deadline. But if the legislature makes an adjustment, he says his office will carry it out.
So there's always an ongoing conversation with them about, if they're going to make this change, making sure that it's drafted in a way that it can be executed, but also to make sure that they meet the deadline, because 90 days is the effective date for bills in Ohio. So unless they were able to get an emergency clause, that means that by early May, they would have to get this passed.
Since the 90-day law to certify a candidate was enacted in 2009, the General Assembly has made exceptions in 2012 and 2020. In 2020, both parties' national nominating conventions were held after the Ohio deadline. Thank you for joining me this week for Face the State. I'm Doug Petcash. I'll see you next Sunday at 11:30. Have a great day.